All right, let's get some analysis of Mark Carney's first budget. Of course, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne tabling the budget yesterday. It includes a deficit projected to be $78.3 billion next year. That's a big increase from what was forecasted just last December. Let's bring Moshe Lander into the conversation, senior lecturer in economics over at Concordia University. Moshe, welcome back to the show.
Hello.
Let's talk about the deficit. First things first, right? Because we heard the Prime Minister this morning speaking about it, and he throws out there, oh, well, you compare us to the OECD countries. We actually have a debt to GDP ratio that's really low, and the G7 nations, actually everything's hunky-dory with deficits. And I want to know from your perspective, if you buy that, how do you view a big number in the deficit column?
I always love when my students say to me, well, I did better than average. It infuriates me because the question is, did you do your best? So it doesn't matter that you did better than average. If you didn't do your best, then you should be disappointed. It's the same thing here to say, well, we're better than most of the G7. Well, congratulations. Did you do the best that you could? I'm not entirely sure that that's true. Now, that said, the fact that the government has a very large deficit does not disappoint me at all. On a personal level, if you and I were having rough times in our lives, we would probably be outspending our income and having to borrow from our line of credit or our credit card or from family and friends or getting advances on our paychecks because that's the nature of we need to make sure that there's food on the table and that the mortgage is paid and we keep the lights on. So it's the same thing for the government. They're going to have to outspend their income because times are tough right now. And they're probably the most uncertain and unstable outside of COVID that we've seen probably since the Second World War. So the fact that the deficit is big is not worrying. Was the deficit, though, accumulated on building things that would sustain Canada's long-term potential? I don't think that was the case, and that's the part that would disappoint me.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like to keep with your analogy, right? So let's say you are that family and times are tough. Okay, yeah, maybe you'll have to go into a little bit of debt temporarily. You want to get out of that. But then you'd also think of like, what would a family do if they needed to turn things around? Oh, will they pick up an extra job? Like, what are the things a family would do to get out of tough times? And I'm wondering if the government is doing enough here to get out of tough times other than spending.
No. Now, to be fair, this is a government that's been in place for 8 months. And I know that some people will say, well, it's just a continuation of the Trudeau Liberals, but it's not. It's an entirely different government. Fine, many of the people are the same, but the person in charge is very different and has very different objectives. And so we haven't even really given them a full year to show what they can do or what they're going to do. I think one of the important things that they highlighted in the budget was the distinction between the operating side of things and the capital side of things. And while it's always existed and exists in almost every business out there, it's not something that's really been talked about a lot. The difference between operating and capital is operating is the day-to-day operations. And the government has said that they're committed to trying to balance that budget the way you and I would try to balance our day-to-day lives. The capital budget is the long-term part of the story. And so they're saying that, look, if we're going to build a pipeline or a bridge or we're going to invest in new defense equipment, that stuff's going to last decades. And so to merely say, well, that's what added to the deficit this year, fine, but if it pays off benefits over years and years to come, we need to keep in mind that that deficit this year is maybe unflattering because of that. And so we're going to try and train Canadians in coming years to think about these distinctions. I think, unfortunately, the latter part of the Trudeau years were spent on letting the operating budget run out of control. And so Carney now has to figure out how to rein that back in. And that's what he said he was committed to over the next 3 years.
This is what, because we've always done things like spending on infrastructure. We've always built bridges. We've always done these things. So I'm trying to figure out what's different about it now. And when I look at these big infrastructure projects, they eventually have to be replaced. You've got to replace the bridge eventually. You got to do the maintenance on the bridge. So I'm trying to figure out why it's different here if you put it in a separate column that you rightfully point out. Businesses do the same thing. But what's the difference? To me, we've always done that.
We have always done, but we've never highlighted it to Canadians that we've done that. And so I think part of the story then is that Canadians are only interested in that one number that we heard yesterday, which was a $70-something billion deficit. And we say, well, that stinks. Well, wait a second. if the government balanced its budget on a day-to-day basis, but they ran up $70 billion of infrastructure spending, well, that's very different than they overspent day-to-day spending by $70 billion and balanced their budget on infrastructure spending. So neither one of those cases are what we experienced this past year, but it's important to highlight that difference. I think anybody in Quebec, of course, can appreciate that the government does have to spend money on repairing roads, but they don't seem to do a particularly good job of it.
Yeah.
So even there where the money is being spent, it's not necessarily how much you're spending, but when are you spending it? Are you getting it at the right time, or are you trying to extend its life to the detriment of what it's going to cost you going forward? The other thing to keep in mind, too, is that a lot of our infrastructure spending over the years has been built to create north-south infrastructure, right? We've always been looking to the U.S. as our key trading partner and the destination for 80% of our exports. The realization now is maybe we need to be thinking about infrastructure development as an east-to-west exercise. And so the thought of building pipelines now or trying to connect the provinces, removing interprovincial barriers, those are maybe the more important things than the north-south delivery.
Cuts and spending cuts here, right? So they're eliminating 40,000 public service positions. Apparently 12,000 already has been done, so 28,000 further positions by 2029. That's 10% of the workforce. I also point this out. They've actually, department cuts, right? From one department to another, they're asking for cuts. Health Canada has to have savings of 15%, but much lower targets for other parts of government. Defense and security agencies, only 2%. Crown Indigenous Relations, only 2%. The Department for Women and Gender Equality, only 2%. Again, off the top I mentioned, Health Canada gets dinged with 15%. What about the cuts? Are we cutting enough, Moshe?
Well, again, where you're highlighting 15% here and 2% there, let's also keep in mind then what has been done in the last 10 years, right? So if Health Canada has increased by 50%, then a 15% cut isn't all that significant. If defense over the last 10 years has seen a decline in the number of workers there, then a cut of 2% could actually be very punishing, given that they're not even replacing what's going on. The biggest growth in government spending over the last 20 years, even predating the Trudeau Liberals, has been mostly in the public sector. And once you have a public sector job, it is extremely difficult to get rid of anybody because of the power of their union. So a lot of this is going to come through just attrition or early buyouts to just get people to jump in advance. And so that could actually add to the deficit in the coming years, even though it would save money on the back end. The broader issue is what it does to morale. If you're in a workplace where you're being told that people have to be let go, that means then that the same work still has to be done. It's just going to have to be done by fewer people. And now all of a sudden people are saying, great, I got to keep my job, but I now have to work 15% harder, 2% harder. And I'm not even going to see money for that because the government's probably going to put in a pay freeze as well, or a limited amount of pay increases. That's the type of thing then that could actually lead some of the best and brightest to forgo a career in the public sector for somewhere else because they feel that they might be more appreciated. So to me, that's the bigger issue than merely just a headline number of let's cut jobs.
What do you think the immigration changes do to the economy? So, by the way, permanent immigration is pretty much stays the same. They're going to cut it from 395,000 this year to 380,000, okay, per year for the next 3 years. So it's almost the same number, a small decline. But temporary immigration is going to be slashed, 385,000 compared to 673,000 that it stands at now. What about that part of it? You're trying to build economy, you're reducing temporary immigration. How does that play out, Moshe?
I think the bad analogy that I can give you here is kind of like a pendulum, right? So if you push a pendulum too far in one direction and then remove your hand, it swings back violently back in the other direction. If you push the pendulum just a little bit, then it does swing back, but it only swings back a little bit, right? It's almost proportional to the force that you place on it. It's the same thing here. Trudeau government was accused of being way too relaxed about immigration and maybe overdoing it. So in one sense, they pushed the pendulum way too far in one direction for Canadians' liking. And so what you're seeing now is the pushback is pretty violent in the other direction. I don't think it's found that nice middle ground yet. And so it's almost like it's just a counter balance to what was seen as overdoing it here. Well, we're going to create our bona fides by showing that, well, we're going to push back hard in the other direction. I think that this is probably going to be damaging. And at some point, there's going to be a realization that, yeah, maybe this is too far the other way. And what you see then is the pendulum is going to come back the other way. And it's going to have to be loosened up, maybe not in the next year, but probably within the next 5 years. We're going to see that there's probably some middle ground that is appropriate for what the economy needs.
Abacus polled Canadians this week and asked them how they feel about the next 12 months. How do they feel about the Canadian economy for the next 12 months? months. 46% said not good. 19% said, oh, good. The Canadian economy is going to do well over the next 12 months. Let me wrap up here with you, Moshe, by asking you, how do you feel about the Canadian economy for the next 12 months?
So 54% of people didn't say that it was bad. That's actually a good sign, right? Because really the economy is not doing well right now. But the great thing is that economies always have ups and downs. That's the business cycle. So look, there will be a brighter day. It might not be next year, but it will come. And I think that right now what we're going through is another upheaval similar to what we saw during COVID. And once we figure out what that new balance looks like, I think that pessimism will turn into optimism, but it really is a matter of, the government right now needs to be giving guidance to Canadians as to what they're doing, what they're achieving, and trying to stay above politics and presenting that information, much the same way that when the central bank says, here's what we're doing and here's what we see, Canadians have bought into it, and where their maybe trust was a little bit shaken in 21-22, Canadians are right back into trusting the Bank of Canada's use of their monetary policy tools. The government can build up that trust as well, especially when you have an economist at the helm who understands the importance of transparency and communication.
Moshe, got to leave it there. Great talking to you. Thanks so much.
Anytime.
Moshe Lander is a senior lecturer in economics over at Concordia University.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.